So you've tested your pool for phosphates and you've found that they're higher than what they should be. What do you do about it? Well, this video is all about high phosphates in swimming pools, so stick around. Hi there, I'm Louis from Pool Advisor, and today we're talking about high phosphates in pools. So, the first thing you need to understand about pool water chemistry is that the whole point of what we're doing with our water chemistry is that we're trying to create a safe environment for our swimmers so that people can use our pool without getting sick from algae or bacteria. The thing with algae though is that in the right conditions they can grow and thrive in your pool, but they need quite a few different things to be able to grow properly. They need sunlight, they need some kind of form of carbon, they need nitrogen, and they also need phosphorus. The thing is that out of all of these, phosphorus tends to be the limiting nutrient in the environment for them. There's plenty of sunlight, there's plenty of carbon, and there's usually a lot of nitrogen as well. So the thing that stops them from growing out of control and multiplying like crazy is generally phosphorus. In most swimming pools, people don't always care about phosphorus, and they tend to control bacteria and algae growth using chlorine, using sanitizer, which works perfectly well, and that will stop the algae and the bacteria from growing. But as soon as your levels start to dip a little bit, your chlorine levels, the algae and the bacteria will start to grow like crazy as long as there's sufficient phosphorus in the water for them to consume and to grow. What you can do is you can start reducing the phosphate in your water to basically starve the algae and bacteria of the food that they need to grow. And if you starve them hard enough and reduce the phosphorus levels enough, you can actually make it quite difficult for them to even find enough food to grow at all, which basically creates another line of defense for you. So you've got your sanitizer, your chlorine, which is basically killing the bacteria. So we're basically trying to create as inhospitable an environment for algae and bacteria in our pool as possible. And the first line of defense is maintaining a level of free chlorine in the pool. And this will basically make it extremely difficult for algae and bacteria to grow in the pool. The next thing that you can do is remove the phosphates to a low enough level that even if the chlorine does start to dip a bit below where it should be, there actually is so little food in the pool for the algae and bacteria to consume and grow that they actually would have trouble growing even without the chlorine. So what is a high level of phosphates? There's kind of a lot of disagreement about this, but anything above 500 parts per billion is generally considered too high. And yes, I did say billion there and not million. 1 part per million equals 1,000 parts per billion. And we want to keep our phosphates below 500 parts per billion. Hopefully that makes sense. So how do you test for phosphates? Well, you use a set of phosphate test strips, and I'll put a link to them in the description below, a place where you can purchase them. And that these phosphate test strips are useful because they test all the way from 0 up to 2,500 parts per billion. So they really cover that full range there, and you'll be able to very quickly tell with these test strips if your phosphates are high enough that they are encouraging the growth of algae and bacteria in your pool, which is not what you want. If you use these test strips and you find that your phosphate levels are above 500 parts per billion, then the next step is to use a phosphate remover. And phosphate removers are chemicals, consist of lanthanum chloride. And lanthanum chloride, what it does is it reacts with the dissolved phosphate in your water. It will find that phosphate and it will react with it and make a solid. So the phosphate goes from dissolved form to a solid form. The good thing about this is that in this solid form, your filter can capture this phosphate now and remove it from the pool, which means that it's no longer available for algae and bacteria to consume it and to grow in your pool and create unsanitary conditions. There's a few different options out there for phosphate removers, but I like the low chlor Starva product. It comes with a clarifying agent built into it, so it stops that problem that you get with a lot of phosphate removers, which is cloudy pool water after you've added it. Often when you add phosphate remover, you will see that the pool water goes cloudy, which is not actually a bad sign. That means that the lanthanum chloride is reacting and forming lanthanum phosphate and creating that solid, which will be ultimately removed by your pool filter. But that can take a bit of time. The low chlor Starva product has got a clarifier built in to speed up that process of your filter removing the phosphate from the water. Remember that you can't use phosphate remover once you've already got an algae outbreak. The phosphate, once algae and bacteria already grow in your pool at quite a rate, they've already consumed a degree of that phosphate and they've bound it up in that cells so that it's not actually accessible by the lanthanum chloride and it can't react with that anymore. So it's useful as a preventative product, not after you've already had an algae outbreak. So if you've got a phosphate problem and you've already got algae growing, you need to deal with that algae first by shocking your pool and getting rid of all that algae, and then later on down the track you can look at adding a phosphate remover to clear up the phosphate levels and make it a more inhospitable environment for algae and bacteria to grow in the future. What causes high phosphates and how can you stop them from coming back? Well, that's a very good question, and the answer is that phosphates come from a variety of different sources, but basically any organic material is going to contain phosphates. So that means things like leaves leaves or lawn trimmings, flowers, or even animal droppings, anything like that that gets into your pool will break down in the water and release phosphates. Also, if you've had like a rain event and you've had some runoff from the garden, things like fertilizers are extremely rich in phosphorus, and they will actually, rain running off from your garden into your pool will introduce quite a bit of phosphorus into your water as well. Another one is the human factor. Urine is very high in phosphates. If you have a lot of children or adults that use your pool and urinate in it, you will see your phosphate levels increase quite substantially over time. Humans can also introduce it in the form of like skincare products and sunscreen that they're wearing. These things are high in phosphates, and certain pool chemicals do also contain phosphates, believe it or not. So do just keep an eye on what pool chemicals you're using and just read the ingredients and try to avoid using products that do contain phosphate. If you can try to do that, do all of those things, you will go a long way to reducing the phosphate levels in your pool and keeping them low. Ultimately though, they are going to increase steadily over time, and you will need to add phosphate remover on a periodic basis to keep your levels low. The best way to make sure you keep them low is to use the test strips I mentioned earlier, and just whenever you see your levels climbing above 500 parts per billion, adding some phosphate remover to just bring that back down to a reasonable level. Hopefully all of that makes sense. If this video has helped you at all, please like, comment, and subscribe to my channel, where I will be releasing more videos on swimming pool maintenance. Thank you very much.